to all the attendees, thank you so much for joining. We are so excited to have you here and have Michael and Dr. Howitt here as well. Just quick housekeeping items. So we have lots of features on Zoom, and two features that I want to call out. Please use the chat and reactions button for interaction. We so enjoy reading the comments and a lot of interactions there. And then what's really important is that we really value and really hold high the questions that you have. Please use the Q&A function. That is kind of our easiest way to identify the questions, and we want to make sure that we get as many as we can answered. So if everyone can hop between the chat, reactions, and then over the Q&A when you have questions to ask, that would be perfect. So I'll turn it over to you guys. Thank you.
And thank you. I have a disclaimer to start with because I am not a doctor. So I wrote this up because I'm on with a doctor. The following presentation is not intended to diagnose or treat any illness. Audience members should be aware that the speaker knows F all about medicine, yet he still fancies himself as an expert in mental health. He also seems to believe he's witty and irreverent. Do not be fooled by this. Also, be aware he may dye his hair. He dresses too young for his age, and sometimes he tries too hard to get people to like him. Viewer discretion is advised. My name is Michael Landsberg, and I have battled mental illness all of my life since my earliest memories. I have battled anxiety, and specifically one aspect of anxiety. The last 20 years, I battled depression, which was this huge education for me that depression was nothing like I thought it would be. Nothing. And if everyone could feel what serious depression feels like, I think the stigma would largely disappear. But you can have no idea what a mental illness feels like unless you feel it. And that's one of the reasons to me why it's very difficult to parent somebody with a child with a mental illness. It's very difficult to understand what they might be going through. So very briefly, this is my history. I grew up in a house. Did my parents love me? Yes. Did they adore me? Yes. Did their world revolve around me and my brother? Absolutely. Did they focus their lives on us? Yes. Did we ever discuss mental illness? No. Did the word suicide ever come up? No. If we would have talked, would they have understood? And the answer is probably no. Different time. My story, the earliest memories that I have are anxiety, general anxiety, even though I didn't know that was the name for it, and specific anxiety. I was laser focused on worrying about some things. And there was one big thing. And that thing, I found out recently, has a name to it. I was afraid of throwing up, like that. I was afraid of being around someone, not because I would catch the illness from them, but just afraid. No rational reason why. No rational reason why somebody like me would be watching television and someone would throw up and I would all of a sudden be panicked. It makes no sense. It made no sense. I never mentioned that to anyone. Why not? I never lived in anyone else's brain. I didn't know. Do other people feel this? I didn't think so. I think it was probably not that situation. But was this an illness that could be treated? I had no idea there was an illness that could be treated. I just sat on it. And of course, I was ashamed as well. So fast forward now to 20 years from back then when we had a son. His name is Corey. And Corey called me into his room when he was 5. Well, actually, I think he called mom and dad, but it was me that got up and went, Dad, Mom. So I went into his room and I heard 3 words, which I knew were going to change my future. These 3 words, will I barf? I went back to see Karen for a second. I went, we're screwed. Obviously joking partly. So I said to him, he says, am I going to throw up? And I say to him, do you feel sick? And he said, I don't know. How would I know if I feel sick? Will I throw up? And I said, no, because you're not sick. And he said, how do you know? And we went back and forth and I realized there was no answer for that. And I had to call upon my experience as a child, what would have helped me? And I think that got us through a lot of really difficult times, except that time on the plane when someone beside him puked and he literally climbed over the seat to get to the next row. The people behind were not as sensitive about mental health challenges for young people and probably didn't appreciate him on their lap. So that's my history, and that's why I love this topic. And if you pay close attention to what our guest, our expert says, I think that it may change the environment in your house. Ariana Howitt, you are, not like I got to tell you, that'd be kind of weird, the clinical director for On Our Sleeves. That's an educational advocacy research organization. Since launching in 2018, you, probably not personally, have helped more than 2 million people with free educational resources, conversations, educating family, and boosting mental health and wellness. Congratulations for that. And how are you?
I'm good. I'm excited to be here this morning.
Okay, well, thanks for doing this. And, you have an expertise that when I was a kid, I don't even know if that expertise existed. So I guess my first question is, me as a kid and my son, Corey, as a kid, does that sound familiar to you? Is that common?
Anxiety is a very common diagnosis. It's the most common diagnosis for children. One of the reasons we do what we do at On Our Sleeves is because a lot of people don't realize that mental health is something that impacts children. I think post-pandemic, people did have more awareness that yes, kids are not doing well and that mental health diagnoses can impact kids. But prior to the pandemic, we created On Our Sleeves because people weren't talking about it. A lot of people say, oh, you're a kid, you don't have a reason to be depressed. What are you stressed about? And in reality, pre-pandemic, we knew that 1 in 5 kids in the US were living with a mental health diagnosis. And we know that half of lifetime mental illness starts by the age of 14. So we really have to be talking about children's mental health when we have the mental health conversation.
So let's have the conversation that should be the conversation in one of our many viewers today who may have children. Many of them would. Everybody knows someone. And I'm kind of the belief that this kind of talk will help you in any aspect of your life, that talking to your kids isn't necessarily totally different than talking to your friends. So let's start with the home. I'm not going to ask you, is it important to talk about this? Because obviously it is. If you're talking to somebody who's never really spoken about mental health to their kids, and they have 3 kids ranging from 10 to 18 years of age, how do you start the conversation?
Yeah, that's a great question. I love that you were sharing how your parents care for you very much. And then you said, did we talk about mental health? No. And we've done research with working parents and caregivers. And we hear that over and over again, is that most people who are currently raising children didn't grow up talking about mental health with their families. So they're telling us, we know mental health is important. I'm worried about my child's mental health, but I don't know how to talk about it because it's not something I experienced growing up. So we created something called Operation Conversation. If you go to onoursleeves.org, you will find Operation Conversation on there. And it's all about giving you the tools you need to get the conversation started. And to me, as a psychologist, the most important part is how to keep the conversation going. Because if I ask a question and I get an answer back that's tough to hear as a parent or a family member, and I respond in a way that maybe shuts down the child, they're not going to want to keep coming back and talking to us. But if I respond in a positive, reinforcing way that feels good to them, you're now creating that healthy relationship with the child, and they're going to want to keep having those conversations with you. So it's really important that we know how to start, but also how to respond and react when they share.
Okay, so tell me the right way and the wrong way to respond. You ask the question, I'll be your kid, and I'll respond in 2 different ways. So ask me a starting question.
So an opening question would be something like, tell me a little bit about, well, let's back up. Let me ask you this. We have the recommendation of starting conversations when you're not worried, just to build the habit and relationship, and starting conversations when you're worried. So with this role play, which one would you like to try?
I'm going to say that, I'm worried because I got to say, and I'm actually closing my eyes and going back to my youth, which is like almost 3 decades. Lie. Sorry, I don't know who yelled. That was my wife who yelled lie. So I'm going to start with being unwell at this point.
Worry. Yeah. So I would say something like, we want to point out what we're observing, and then we want to ask a non-judgmental question. So something like, hey, I realize that you used to spend a lot of time with your friends, and now you're not really hanging out with them. Is there something bothering you right now?
Okay. So I'll answer that honestly, as opposed to the kid that might cover it up, right? Because sometimes they don't offer it as freely as they would many other things. So I'm going to say, well, I just feel like I'm nervous all the time. I don't know how to explain it. I don't know why. I know I've retreated. I know I spend too much time in my room, but I don't have the confidence that I used to have. And I'm happier if I'm just lying on my bed.
Okay. So in this case, what we recommend is we want to listen. We want to keep the kid talking. And a lot of times as adults, we want to jump into advice. We want to jump into telling the kid what to do. That's not helpful in this moment. So I would say something like, tell me more, just to keep talking, right? Tell me more. That sounds really difficult.
And the wrong way you mentioned giving advice, because chances are also the parent isn't really qualified to offer advice unless they're like me. See, I could offer advice to Corey because I'd been through it and I knew what would help him. And it was very difficult for my wife to offer advice that was useful, because the fallback position, would you agree, is as a parent, there's wishful thinking. You don't want your kid to be sick. You don't want your kid to have a mental illness. So the tendency is to minimize. Would you agree with that?
Exactly. And really, when I talk about Operation Conversation, you will find we have 3 steps. We have the step 1 is starting the conversation. Step 2 is keeping them talking. And then step 3 is the advice giving. Because as adults, of course, our job is to guide our children, right? And so I do want parents to help their kids. I don't want them to walk out today feeling like, oh, the doctor said don't give advice. But really, before we jump into our opinion and our thinking, I really want people to take that moment to listen, keep their kid talking, thank them for sharing, validate. That sounds really hard. Thank you for sharing. That must have been really, you're being so brave and talking to me about this. And then I say, ask them what they want to do first, what they think could be helpful. And then all the way at the end, you say, okay, I have some thoughts of things that may help. Are you ready to hear them? So you ask permission. If the kid says no, then you can say, okay, when's a better time? And then you come back to it. Maybe you take a 10-minute break because emotions are high. Maybe you say tomorrow morning instead, but keep them to that, come back to it, and then give the advice, have that conversation in a gentle, supportive way.
Do you think you should preface the conversation you're talking about now, which would be offering suggestions? Do you think you should preface it if you haven't been through it and you haven't studied psychology? Would a parent, because my instinct would be to say, hey, if I hadn't been through what I've been through, hey, I don't know what you're feeling, and I can't know what you're feeling. So when I offer you advice, you have to know that it comes from a place of love, but not necessarily a place of knowledge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I love that you're pointing that out, because sometimes we want to give advice based on our experience, but our experience may not match our child's. And so that's why I always suggest first asking the child what they think may help, and then working as a team, working with them versus just telling them what to do. And then again, as a parent, saying something like, what do you think about if we, talk to a mental health professional, or talk to your teacher, or talk to, finding other people in the community, whether a mentor, a doctor, a teacher, mental health professional, to jump in.
I mean, that's can't miss great advice, right? No one's going to say, no, you shouldn't say that. But the advice that I'm thinking of is what I've heard a million times from people, what they hear. Now, these are often adults, but still kids. I mean, I've spoken in tons of high schools. And what they'll say is, my parents, they'll tell me like the typical things, suck it up, or, what are you nervous about? Don't be nervous. And that's advice that makes sense in a non-sufferer's head, right? Like you think, if your kid's got depression, for instance, you think your kid is sad, so you do something nice for your kid, which is nothing wrong with doing something nice. But if you assume it's a treatment for the illness, I think that can push a kid back into the hole.
Absolutely. Yeah, we have to be so careful that we're validating, that we're not dismissing the feeling. Just because we don't agree, especially when it comes to things like anxiety, where people are like, you don't have a reason to be afraid, or you don't have a reason to be stressed. Like you mentioned, watching someone throw up on TV, someone else may be like, well, nothing's going to happen, right? But that's real for you. And so, yes, we have to be careful that we are saying, it's okay to say things like, look, I don't understand that experience you're having. I don't understand that emotion you're having, but that's okay. I'm here for you. We're going to work through it together. It's distressing to you. Let's figure out how to support you.
Look, I don't know you, so this is first impression, but this is really, really good stuff. That's really functional and useful. So often professionals will give you advice, but you're going, well, I can't do that. I'm not a professional. So let's play. I'm going to role play again. So you are my parent, okay? So talk to me like you are my parent, and ask me if anything's wrong with me. And something, I'm not doing well, okay? This is not sort of fact finding. I'm a very different person. So ask me.
So how would I get
Just
you talking if I know that something's wrong?
And if my response was, no, nothing's wrong.
Oh, okay. So if I were to have asked you, is something going on, something bothering you, say, no, nothing's wrong, then I would have to say, look, I can tell something's going on. And then that's where we want to be objective and not judgmental. Something like I already mentioned, you're not spending time with your friends, or you used to play a sport and now you don't want to anymore. You used to have good grades and they've dropped. So just kind of highlighting, you're spending a lot of time in your room. You seem to not be eating as much anymore. Whatever it is that we're observing, but notice I'm not using any good, bad judgment words. I'm just saying the facts. I'm stating what I'm noticing without saying this is bad, you're lazy, or whatever labels we use. And then saying, what can we do to help? What can help? And sometimes, especially with teenagers, we may surprise them with this conversation. So it's okay to point those things out and say, I really want to talk about it. I really want to be here to support you and help you. When is a good time to talk about it? Because it's possible that they're just shocked in that moment and need us to come back the next day to continue.
Yeah, I kind of look at it like I'm fine. And like that's the line. Like we have anybody, in the mental health world, which is actually just our world, has had a friend or a family member, maybe a teen, maybe an older family member, where you say, are you okay? And the answer is, I'm fine. And you say, no, you're not fine. And they go, I'm fine. And now they're getting mad and indignant because it's almost like you're calling them out, but you're not.
Yeah.
You just want to help them. How do you convince the reticent child to take that first step and go for help?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because whether it's the stigma or the child feels like it's normal, maybe they have friends that also are feeling the same way or going through the same thing. And so they kind of feel like this is normal, it's fine. I always focus on the things that their mental health is getting in the way of. So if you weren't feeling this way, what would you be doing? And kids would say, like, they're children. So they'll say like, well, I want to go to a sleepover, but I feel too nervous. So maybe I'd go to a sleepover, or I would ask a friend to come over, or I would do a presentation in front of my classmates. So that's the kind of question I sometimes I'll even tell a kid, if I give you a magic wand, you could change everything right now. What would it look like? And so it's getting creative to hear what they want their life to look like versus what their life looks like right now.
Just give me a second here. Oh my God, the sleepover thing.
Yeah.
So when I was a kid, I actually lost a friend over it. He said, you want to go to the hockey game? Typical Canadian talking about hockey. Toronto Maple Leafs game, which was kind of the dream when I was a kid. You know, nobody I knew had tickets. So it was like, oh my God, yeah. And he said, and then, you know, you'll sleep over. And I said, okay. And we went to the game, and the whole game, all I did was worry about sleeping over at his house. When the game ended, I said to him, I'm not coming. And I didn't speak to him. He didn't speak to me for 15 years after that.
Wow.
And I had no idea, none, why I was so freaked out about the idea of sleeping over at someone's house. I needed to have the conversation with my parents that you're now having with all of us.
Yeah, and I think that's what's hard about things like what we call mood disorders, which is things like depression or anxiety in children, is that it's hard enough as an adult, but when you're a child and you can't process what you're feeling, why you're feeling it really takes those daily check-ins and conversations with an adult to help you figure that out, right? Those open-ended questions so that you can get to a place of like, you know what? I don't know why, but I am feeling really nervous about that sleepover. And, you know, it can be, each child is different. It could be anything from, I'm nervous about not having my routine in my bed, or I'm nervous about the people in the house. It can be so many things, but it's that discussion that's important.
Wow. Yeah. Where were you? Well, I guess the answer is you were probably many years away from being born, but that would have been. So I have to tell you also, because I think a sense of humor is really important when it comes to dealing with mental health with anyone, and especially with your kid. So Corey would go to sleep over at a friend's house. And it would be like my wife and I would be counting down the seconds to the phone rang, and the phone would ring and it would be, oh, hi, Court. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, sure. We'll come pick you up. He has a headache, which was, I think in his mind, a more legitimate way of saying, you know, I'm freaked out. And my wife and I used to call it the walk of shame, which was me walking up the walkway to people's homes to pick up my son, who everyone knew was probably just, you know, afraid. I could have used you back then.
Yeah. And we know that a lot of kids feel their anxiety physically. Adults do too.
Yeah.
And so that's another great example, right? Headaches, tummy aches, pain in general, nausea can show up as what the kid is telling us. But when you get them talking, you can get to the bottom of, oh, they're feeling nervous.
Yeah, it was always a headache. Ariana, Dr. Howitt, do you want to go serious, very serious now, or a little bit less serious? You pick. We're going to both places, but which one do you want to go to?
Let's go serious. Let's hear it.
Okay. What the word suicide, I never heard the word suicide as a kid. And it was like a shock to me one day when I found out how many Canadians took their own lives and attempted to take their own lives, because, you know, I literally didn't know anybody who had taken their own life. And part of that is because no one would mention the word, you know, there was other reasons given. So suicide, should it be talked about? And then let's talk about how it should be talked about.
Yes, I'm glad you're asking this, because exactly what you said, a lot of people feel nervous talking about suicide. Often what we hear with children is adults telling us, I don't want to ask because I don't want to put the idea in their head. And there's been ample research to show that asking directly about suicide is the best prevention strategy. If a child is not thinking about it, then it's not going to all of a sudden make them want to hurt themselves. Instead, what you're doing is showing them, oh, this adult in my life is a safe space for me to talk to if I ever get to. Maybe they wouldn't ever get to thoughts of suicide, but even if they're distressed for some reason, they know you're safe. So you want to ask directly, have you ever had thoughts of hurting yourself? Do you ever wish you were dead? Or even more directly, have you ever had thoughts of killing yourself or of suicide? And that, again, creates that space. And I go back to, as the adult, checking yourself, being able to take that deep breath. If you hear the answer yes, being able to stay calm so that the child, again, feels okay sharing with you and not shuts down and feels like they're in trouble.
statistically, I'm not a big fan of statistics just because we kind of get numb by it. Like we heard the 1 in 5, and
Right.
by the time someone's 40, 50% of people will have a diagnosable mental illness. And I think like it's much more poignant to talk about one person, what one person has gone through. But in the case of suicide, so I know in Canada, there's about 4,000 suicides a year. In America, there's about 45,000 suicides that are reported. For every completed suicide, there's 20 or 25 attempts. So if you do the math here, you're getting to a rather large number, which means that your kid having suicidal thoughts, which is far greater than the number who will ever attempt suicide. It's not that rare. It's not like you're talking to your kid about something that's like 1 in a million. It's not that.
Right. Yes, I love how you put it. There's the difference between the thought, the action, and even within the thoughts, mental health professionals are often assessing the difference between a passive thought and an active thought. Some people may have a thought like, this is too much. I can't bear it. Things would be better if I wasn't here. But when you get to talking to them, they've never thought of a plan. They tell you, actually, I wouldn't ever do it. That's more of a passive. The active thought is the people thinking, I'm going to do something. I've thought of how. And so, no matter what the child is saying, whether passive, active, you want to take it serious. And I always say, use those suicide hotlines, use the mental health professionals you may have access to. The school staff are often trained. The pediatricians are often trained. So use your community around you. Always take it serious. But there are different levels. And I do think that's important to talk about because it's distressing as a parent. But we do kind of see where the child is at, and we will always safety plan. We'll talk about what do we need to do to keep the child safe. But it doesn't always mean that the child needs hospitalized or intensive treatment, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I have this tattoo on my arm, which I showed last time, and this is passive suicide thought. 11/24/08 YULMH 5210400. That is November 24, 2008. YUL is the Montreal Airport code, Marriott Hotel Room 521, 4 a.m. in the morning. I had been severely anxious and depressed for a year. And I was in so much pain that I thought to myself, wow, I don't know if I can keep going with this forever. I was just, it wasn't a matter of whether I loved my wife or my parents were alive then, or I loved my kids. It was just the pain of it. And I think at that point, it really, it was obvious to me the different levels of suicide. And one is just the idea of avoiding pain.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's where it comes from, right? It's this feeling of hopelessness, this feeling of avoiding the pain or getting rid of the pain, right? And so again, that's what we want to look out for in children is, of course, the comments about hurting and wanting to hurt themselves or wanting to die. But we also want to look for patterns. Is the child expressing those hopelessness, like, I'm not good enough. Nothing will ever be good enough. No one will ever like me. That isolation, feeling excluded, and then that pain. A lot of kids will say, I don't think I'll ever get better.
I feel like one of those birds that you have on your desk that dips its beak into the water. Like I'm nodding my head on everything that you say, because I just think it, I embrace it personally, but also, from being a mental health advocate and talking to parents all the time, you're offering really important stuff. Okay, here's the less painful question or serious question, but so you're talking about, going to an individual child because you think, they've been in their room a lot. Let's say you and I have 3 kids and we're at the dinner table. And I'm a very progressive dad, so I've made a lovely dinner, barbecuing, because we know that men could only barbecue, and that's not really technically cooking. But we're sitting down, and no one has ever talked about mental health in our family. And no one has ever expressed a problem, or we haven't seen a problem. Is it appropriate at that time to make it part of the discussion?
Yes. So we want to start with simply normalizing discussions about emotions. That's kind of the baseline. And you can start as soon as the child is born. You can start now if you have older children. But the idea is to share with each other at the dinner table, like, today I had a stressful day. And I'm feeling stressed, and here's why. You want to keep it developmentally appropriate to the child. I tell my daughter when I'm feeling sad over something. I'll tell her when I'm feeling angry. She's 3. And we talk about emotions, and she brings it up all the time. She'll tell me so-and-so at school was sad today. And so it's normalizing, labeling the feelings so that she understands, and we want kids to understand that emotions are human. And then you can kind of take it from there, right? Start having the deeper discussions of the day-to-day. And I always encourage, don't wait until you're worried. And that's why earlier when we were role playing, I asked you want to do the fun one, the practice one, or the worry one? Because with Operation Conversation, a lot of our conversation starters are just for fun, to get the kid practicing, to get that kid building a relationship with you and feeling good as a family, normalizing those discussions so that if you are ever worried, it's not like, oh, why are you asking me this? Why are you talking to me?
Right. I remember as a kid thinking to myself when I was aware enough that something was probably wrong with me because I never heard anybody else talk about it. One of the reasons why I wouldn't have gone to my parents is that I didn't want to hurt them. And there is the element of that with kids, come from a great family. Parents love the kids love the parents. Kids seldom want to make their parents upset. So there's this attitude, I don't want to hurt my parents' feelings. And it gets deeper than that with mental illness because you think to yourself, my parents are going to blame themselves for me being down in the dumps or me being depressed or anxious.
Yes, I hear that a lot from the kids I see is I don't want to say anything because I don't want to make my parent feel bad, or I don't want to worry them. And the reality is that mental health concerns come from a lot of different factors. There can be biological, our genetics, our chemicals in our brains, and then there can be environmental factors. And so you can have a perfectly loving home, everything's going great in life, and still feel down or still feel anxious or still feel, whatever it is. And so it's again, that part of normalizing and destigmatizing. When talking about mental health, I always give the example of you can eat all your vegetables and exercise every day and still get the flu, right? You can still get physically sick despite doing all the right things. It's the same thing with mental health. Yes, there are things that can keep you more mentally healthy. And then there are some times that you still will get sick and it's not your fault or anyone around you's fault.
Why is it that cooked broccoli smells so bad while it's cooking? Because you said you can eat all the right vegetables or whatever. Do you have an answer for that?
It smells terrible, especially if you add cheese.
Oh my God. It's just like, it's almost not worth the torture of having to smell it. But yeah, I think, like there's no way to insulate, would you agree, your kid from mental health issues or battles?
Yeah. There's this thing that we call in the literature protective factors. So it's insulation. There are things that we can do to help kids kind of bounce off the stress in their lives. It's not perfect, right? So it helps build resiliency. It helps kids get through difficult moments, but that doesn't mean that, there's kids experiencing trauma out there and there's kids that really are going through difficult times. And so despite all the protective factors in the world, they may still be impacted and that's expected. They're human. But there are things that we can do to build that resiliency and hopefully get kids through the hard moments in life.
Yeah, for sure. Cauliflower is bad also when you're boiling it. So let's take this one step further. And that step is you've had this discussion with your 16-year-old, and your 16-year-old has finally opened up to you and agreed that he or she or they have changed, right? I mean, that's like, as you were talking about before, are they enjoying the things they used to enjoy? Are they isolating themselves? So you've both agreed with your child, and you are both on the same page. Now what?
Yeah, that I think is what a lot of people are finding themselves in right now is, okay, I'm worried. My child is worried. We want help. And it's hard to find that help. And that's where our community comes in. You know, there's a lot of different ways to go about finding mental health professionals. Pediatricians may often have, personally, my place of work as a psychologist is in a pediatrician's office. So I see families when they're there for their physicals, any questions that come up mental health related, I'm there to support. So going to the pediatrician, going to the school, a lot of schools do have either people in the building or they have contracts with clinics in the community. Calling if you have insurance, calling the insurance and asking. And then our employers offer the employee benefits too, that I think we'll talk about today. So there's a lot of different ways. I know I've heard a lot of people share that they've had success talking to friends and family. If you know, I know that there's that stigma and that fear, but people have found that when I open up and talk to friends and family, then they have found that, you know, my neighbor will be like, oh yeah, I take my child to therapist and the therapist is great. And here's the name. And then now you're connected. So it's all about reaching out to the people around you.
And it's depending on what country you live in, and even if you pinpoint the country to the US or to Canada, you know, it varies. Treatment and professionals, the access to them varies hugely around the world and around our own country. And sometimes people will like just not know where to go. Would you agree, if you have a family doctor, that is kind of a no-lose place to start? Because sometimes you may not hear the answers. Like, I went to my family doctor when I was first battling depression, and and I loved him, but he minimized it. And I left there going, wow, he doesn't understand what's going on in my head.
Right. Yes. Our family doctors are a great place to go, but they, you know, they're trained in medicine. So they may not have the mental health training. But like I mentioned, some places may have a contract with a mental health professional, or at least point you in the right direction. So I do think that's a good place to go. And, you know, another resource we have at onoursleeves.org, and I don't know if I mentioned this, but all of it is free on our website. If you type into the search bar while you wait, we have resources for families that are on wait list. So you found your place, but you're told you have a 6-month wait and you're worried about your child in that time. We have some ideas of things that can support families in that time.
That access to treatment, obviously, as I said, varies depending on the company you work for, right? And if you're on staff someplace and you get benefits. The problem that I see so often is navigating the system, right? Like, if you take your kid to the doctor, 16-year-old kid, and the doctor, you know, listens to his or her or their heart and thinks, oh, that doesn't sound good, and your blood pressure is high, like all of the warning signs that something's wrong with their heart. No one is going to go, oh my God, what do we do now? The family doctor is going to make a referral to a cardiologist. But mental illness can be, first of all, not taken as seriously. And second of all, parents can be left on their own to figure out, how do I get my child help? And that doesn't exist in many aspects of medicine.
Agreed. Yes, the system is still, like you said, we know where to take a child with a broken leg. We don't know where to take a child that's having a hard time with their mental health. And so that's where I always advise turning to your community and having the conversations to try and get them connected as soon as possible. And, you know, we've talked a lot today about mood disorders, but I would say the same thing with developmental concerns, behavioral concerns. You know, it's about asking, whether the family doctor, the school, your employer, what resources there are to support your child.
Right. And we can find out more. You know, I miss Megan. Megan, are you there? Oh, you just popped up on camera. Hey, Megan.
Right here.
What do you got for us?
We have so many questions, and I think this talk has been so helpful, engaging, and has really sparked a lot of questions and ideas for people to want to seek to know more. So let's get started. Kind of, we have our first question, which is, what is the right age to start getting concerned about their actions? So kind of interpret that, but what is that age where you start saying, okay, I'm starting to see concerns?
Yeah. As soon as early childhood. So, it depends on the child and their story, but if a kid has been through a difficult life situation or stressor, we're looking, 1 and 2 year olds may start showing regressions, behavioral concerns. When it comes to mood disorders like anxiety, you can start seeing that as early childhood. I have a 3-year-old that is showing those anxious tendencies already. But we don't really diagnose something like separation anxiety or an anxiety until probably after 5, because a lot of those behaviors are normative in the early years. But I would say, you know your child best. So if you're seeing behavior changes, mood changes that are almost every day for more than 2 weeks, they're constant and lasting for a while, it doesn't matter their age, that should be a sign for you to start, paying attention and asking about it.
No, that's great.
Yeah, there's no point in me answering because you're the doc and I'm not. So keep her going.
Yeah. Let me see. The next question we have is, how does, and I believe it was asked early in the discussion. So talking about mental health, it says, how does this work for young children with speech delays on top of everything else?
Yeah, that's a great question. We have to get creative there, right? So we have our operation conversation starters, but instead of talking about it, maybe we draw, maybe we act it out, maybe we role play. So it does, of course, add a barrier when the child isn't able to quite express themselves in the same way as other kids, but it's about getting that creativity, and probably this mom knows a lot better than I do what works for that child and how to get that communication, because really it's not about the verbal communication, it's just about that relationship and being able to understand each other.
Yeah, that's great. Some alternative ways. Next question is, how do you navigate when one parent is encouraging and supportive and the other is judgmental and avoidant due to their own stigma?
Yeah, that's tough, right? Because it's important for kids to have consistency in the messaging we're giving. And so I would say it's a conversation between the adults first to try and get on the same page before and agreeing on how are we going to approach the child. There are certain things that are minor that you can model in front of the child. Like, I'll give an example. Just yesterday, we were in the car and my daughter asked a question and my husband was kind of snippy and was like, oh, it was just the phone. And she was like, don't talk like that. And so we had this moment of like, yeah, it sounds like daddy's angry. Can we all take a deep breath together? And so when it's small things like that, you can just model it in the moment. But when it's bigger things, I think the conversation between adults.
I think that was an amazing question because I sort of look at your view on mental illness almost as in the same category, your view about equal rights for men and women, your view about racism. Are you a racist? Because there's these internal beliefs that many people have about mental illness that's just flat out wrong. And if, for instance, the father in this situation, who's male, very difficult sometimes in this day and age to explain what it is I want to explain. So 2 people, that's easier. And one says, oh, honey, I'm really worried about Corey. And the other partner says, well, why are you worried? You got to stop babying him. I mean, I'm sure that would be the kind of language that you would have heard a million times. And sometimes, this is a big problem, right? Sometimes you can't convince that person that your son is not weak. He's just, or she, or they are just sick.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Exactly. And that's where it's a values conversation, right? I would say it's a, even maybe like a couples therapy. It's something to work out together between the adults.
Right.
And that's great. Next question is, the first role play was very helpful. However, one of the situations I'm frequently faced with is if I try to have an open conversation, is I'm not sure, I don't know. How do you keep the conversation open in this situation?
Yes, especially those teenagers are tough. Two things. This is where I recommend the continued practice on things that are not serious, the continued conversations. And it's really helpful to have it be a routine, meaning it's at the same time every day. If a child knows my parent is going to ask me a question at dinner or at pickup or at bedtime, whatever it is, it doesn't throw them off. It's not interrupting anything. They're more prepared. The first few times they may say, I don't know, I don't want to answer. But then as they get used to it and you kind of play that long game and stay consistent, you may start hearing them open up more. Other things that help is sharing your own, like, okay, that's fine. If you don't want to talk, I'll answer the question. And that's where our conversation starters are fun, because it'll be like, if you could live anywhere for a year, where would you live? And so you go around and answer it to, my daughter and I, our routine is at bedtime. We talk about our day. And sometimes she'll say, no, you tell me about your day. She does not want to talk that day. And that's okay. I'll respect that and I'll tell her about my day. So it isn't a one-time thing. It is a routine, a daily thing. Keep trying, keep going until the child starts to learn, okay, my parents here for me and they want to know, they want to hear, and they know to expect it.
I got a question. I got a question for the doc. Doc, longtime viewer for at least the last 50 minutes, and not first time question, but I have this saying, let's go with that, about loneliness, because one of the symptoms of the illnesses that we're talking about is loneliness, right? There's this feeling that nobody understands me, no one could understand me. There may be these feelings of guilt, self-blame, and all of that. But what can change that is if we find somebody who understands us. What about the idea of, you have a kid who's struggling, it, not really wanting to talk much, you don't understand it, finding a group or a person that would understand them and make them feel like they're not alone.
Yes. Community belonging or school belonging is what we call it in the literature. Remember, I mentioned the protective factors, the buffers. That's one of those things. So finding whether a peer, a teacher, a mentor, church leader, anyone in that child's life that helps them feel listened to, belong, supported. Of course, it has to be someone you trust too. But yes, that is super important. And we always recommend helping the kid connect to the community around them.
King, go ahead.
Great. Next question is, my 8-year-old sometimes has a really bad temper and loves playing video games like Minecraft. And he will say things like, kill me now. When I try to talk to him, he says it's just the games, but should I be concerned about this action he is doing?
Yeah, this is such a great question. I'm glad it's being asked. I mentioned earlier, any comments about death we should take serious. And yes, kids will often say it. I mean, we say it as adults, right? Like, oh, what a bad day, just kill me. And we don't truly mean that we want to die. And so the approach we take with children is really explaining, look, this is where it's okay to talk about suicide with our children, saying there are people sometimes that when they feel really upset or sad, they want to harm themselves. So when you say this, I need to take it serious. And so I have gotten to places with kids if they don't change the language they're using. So I'll give other things they can say. Like, when you're frustrated, what's another way for you to express your frustration? What's another phrase that you can use? What's something else you can do to calm down? And if they don't change their language after that conversation, if I have to take it serious, let's try something else, then we put a safety plan in place and say, look, if you're saying kill me now, then I'm going to have to make sure you're not alone. I'm going to have to make sure that I put away anything you can harm yourself with, and kind of put a safety plan in place in the home to show that I'm taking this serious. And if you don't want this to happen, this consequence in the home, we're going to have to use different language.
Yeah, that's great. I think there's a great point in there is that as adults, we could say things passively just because it's something we've said before and we don't realize what it actually is saying. So that's great. So let me go on to the
Can I ask you a question, Megan?
Absolutely.
Okay, so specifically for Cummins employees, they would have options for themselves or their family members when it comes to after they've come to the conclusion, yeah, you know what, we need some help. What would the specific options be for somebody who works with Cummins?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll ask Kate to come off mute too. She leads our health and wellness. So Kate, I mean, I absolutely can answer, but let's put Kate in front and center because I know she's really passionate about this.
Because I love being at the front and center. No, we have lots of resources, and I will ask, we can put a link to some of these in the chat, and they will also be available. They're always available on our It's Okay website. We have employee assistance plans in all around the world. All of those EAPs have some level of clinical support specifically for child mental health. So that's important to remember. We also have medical plans. So if you are in a country, particularly in the US, where we don't have a social network to support us, we have our Cummins medical plan. I would say just about anybody who is enrolled in a US healthcare plan would have some sort of behavioral health support. And then there are also, we have community, suicide hotlines and community support systems that we also have listed out on It's Okay.
And that's a real asset in life to have access to those resources, but not enough people use them, right? EAPs, for instance, are way underutilized, and part of that is the stigma around mental illness. But going to your EAP is confidential, right?
It is, and you make a really good point. All of our EAPs are confidential, and I've worked in this field for many years. I have never known one employee name who has used an EAP, so I try to encourage people to use them. It is a great way to get started. If you aren't sure where to start with mental health, your EAP is probably the best place. Visits are free. If you can try out some different therapists if you'd like, and start to understand the different types of therapy that are available to you. So they are confidential and they are free.
I have used it. My family has used it for our employee, and like you said, it's a whole separate company. People at work won't know that you're using it, and it is very helpful. It usually doesn't have as long a wait time, so I always recommend.
And in every single country, including the US, there are a lot of laws around this too. So any employer that you work for who has an EAP, there are protections in place for that. So I've used it at more than one company I've worked for, so I highly encourage people to give it a try. And again, all of our global EAPs are listed on the It's Okay website, and we'll have links to that in the chat, and then after when we send out the video.
And it's an employee assistant program?
Assistance program, yes. We have them in all countries, but here in the US, it's through LIRA.
Perfect. I would say I'm feeling a little bit of anxiety because we have so many great questions, and I feel the pressure to want to make sure we get them all answered, but I know we can't during this session. Quick reminder that we will be looking at the questions, and if they need a direct response, we'll look at those. And we absolutely will take the questions and chat and help that form our future content that we deliver for the It's Okay program at Cummins. So please know that if you ask a question or had in the chat, we deeply appreciate it. But I want to I'd like us for us all to answer all, but it's not possible within the time. But one thing I'd like to wrap up, I saw it in the chat and I saw some in the questions, and is when we as adults, we also have our own mental health and how do we, and I think when we talk about open conversations, how do we also not project that onto our kids? in terms of, I'm anxious when, X, Y, and Z or whatnot for them to start baseball or whatever it is. But then do we let ourselves open up a little bit so that they say that, hey, even like mommy and daddy or caregiver X, Y, and Z has it too? What's that fine line?
Yeah, it is. It's a fine line. I think it's about if you're feeling like you have it, emotions are like a wave. They crest, they're really, really hard, and we can't think straight and have no control when we're up at the wave, and then they calm. If you're up at this wave, that's time for you to handle it, cope with it, be on your own. Once you're at a calm space and you feel like you have figured out your way through that wave, that's okay to share it. Like, yeah, I have felt nervous too, and here's what helped me. But in that moment, it's hard for you individually. It's really hard to bring a child into it too. So I would say that's probably one of the ways to think about it is when you feel more calm and in control, it's okay to talk about it. Nope, you're muted, Megan.
There we go. I'm back. Thank you all. I know we're at time. I want to thank you. And I know on behalf of our Cummins, I want to thank you, Michael, for sure, Dr. Holt, for sure, for coming and joining. And hopefully please look out for our next upcoming sessions. We're passionate about bringing this to you. we got
Already, I love it.
Yeah, if you have any questions, I'm here, which sounds really good. If maybe I'll just ignore them, but right now I sound very, very community minded. And our charity, not looking for donations, but our charity is called Sick, Not Weak. Mental illness like depression is a sickness, not a weakness.
Absolutely.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank
Thank
you,
everybody. Have a really great day.